Yeah, I'm just going to have a little chat, getting your notes up.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Oh, sorry. Getting your notes up?
Yes, I am.
We're passing around a microphone because the microphone we were using before is broken.
But I ain't spending any time on it. But I ain't spending any time on it. But I ain't spending any time on it. But I ain't spending any time on it.
Oh my god, that's so good.
Hello, friends. Hi. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Yanni.
Welcome back to Should'n'ta, Australia's premier show about how we got here and why it's bad that we did. When we laugh...
And we love to laugh.
When we last left our protagonist, Anthony Norman Albo Albanese, he'd established himself as a powerful behind-the-scenes figure in the Labour Party. He's 33 at this point, past his athletic prime, but ready for higher, perhaps more cerebral duties.
Okay, very rude. Some of us are 31. We're getting very close to that, 33.
And would you say that you're currently in your athletic prime?
I'm going to the gym.
And so by 33, you might be, over the hill passing your athletic prime.
That's so rude.
But you'll have more wisdom.
I don't... Yeah, but there's not like a gym for the brain, Like, I think what I've got is what I've got. I think that's it.
I think the gym for the brain is the New South Wales parliamentary system. And Albo has his eye on a familiar place. Graindler. In our last episode, we talked about it, but it's been an electorate since 1949, and it's always been a Labour seat. Fred Daly won every election until 74, mostly beating Liberal challengers with the occasional independent or commie, and then he handed over to Gough Whitlam's son and a couple other people. Labour right Leo Macleay took it and held it from all manner of socialist, communist and Democrat until 93, when Jeanette McHugh took over in the coup we talked about in episode 1 of this series. This was also the first election with a Greens candidate, who took 6% of the vote. In 1996, Albo is going to be taking over from McHugh, and he obviously wins this election. This is the story we're telling. He does suffer a 12.5% swing against Labour, and that swing is almost entirely eaten by his greatest enemy yet.
Is it the Greens?
No, it's the No Aircraft Noise Party.
Oh, fuck.
Remember when we moved to Brisbane and started living closer to an airport than we ever had?
Yes, I do. And it was very exciting because I've always wondered what it would look like if a plane just crashed right in front of us. Obviously, I don't want that to happen, but it's in the back of my mind a lot more than it was before.
It's more likely than it was before, and it's probably not going to happen. But if it did, can you imagine? Well, look, and I mean, it could be worse. We could live in a big city. We live in a big Australian city, and people are going to Europe. And remember when we realized how big an issue aircraft noise is?
I guess.
There were just signs everywhere. All the politicians are talking about it. So this dates back. This iteration of the aircraft noise party apparently sicked an old man on an ALP security guard and almost bit his finger off.
What the fuck do you mean?
They set an old man to fight an ALP security guard, and the old man almost bit his finger off.
Okay, so clarification. Almost bit his finger off as in like, oh, he was going to, but his mouth didn't get close enough. Or almost bit his finger off like he was like 70% of the way to biting this man's finger off, but, that 30% held on.
Actually, neither. He bit half his finger off. No, I don't actually know. They also made a CD of songs. Well, I mean, they made an album called Songs from the Heartland with a bunch of little kids singing in a choir. They have this song about Albo and his colleague, Laurie Brereton. I'll sing it to you.
Please.
Laurie has a lap dog, lap dog, lap dog. Laurie has a lap dog, he calls it Albanese. They say he's a shih tzu, a shih tzu, shih tzu.
That goes fucking hard. I want the original of that. I want to find it so bad.
If you can, look, listeners, if you can get us songs from the Heartland, just drop it in the chat. All right, we need to hear the Albo song. He's not happy about the song. He said there were little kids they had singing this, as in, ha ha, shit zoo, brilliant. They produced posters that had me as a dog.
Good for him, and maybe this is, you know what? This is a taster of his like absolute hatred for like memes on social media and how like he got pissed off that people were making edits of him. It all comes back to this dog poster, I swear.
I think it absolutely does, and in general, his interfacing with the media is really interesting. Kevin Butler, the no aircraft noise candidate, burst into tears outside a Marrickville childcare center, saying, "What about the children under the flight path?"
Are they going to get hit by the planes?
We'll see. Albo isn't one to underestimate anybody, even some guy named Kay Butler. So he ensures that some lady from the Labour Party, also named Kay Butler, ran as an independent with the same colours as the No Aircraft Noise Party.
Fuck off. That's some fucking like Ditto from Pokemon shit.
He says he didn't do it. He says it was her idea, clearly. She decided to run spontaneously.
Oh yeah, you know, that really interesting scientific thing, spontaneous election.
Unlike a spontaneous election or even a spontaneous erection, it didn't really matter because Albo still got more than 50%. Worst Labour showing up till that point in Grayndler, but still obviously more than half. And he enters the House of Representatives as part of the opposition government. Prior to the election, hilariously, Albo's quoted in a Canberra Times article as saying, "I cannot believe that John Howard could ever be the Prime Minister of this country."
And God bless. And see, here's the thing. Really good with numbers is our Albo. Not really good at telling the future because, yeah. Can you believe it?
11 years later. Albo's one of the very few people still in Parliament today that were around for the whole Howard ministry, which was a dark time for Australian progressives and one that I think shaped his belief about power. Most people would agree. Talking about a dark time for Australian progressives, Albo was having to trek down a dark corridor to get to his office in Canberra. And the person who allocates offices for the Labour Party is the opposition whip. Former government whip, an unceremoniously dumped member for Grayndler, Leo McClay.
Government whip.
You remember government whip?
Why the fuck is it called a whip?
He whips everyone into shape. He decides things like where offices go.
Damn.
And he's put Albo as far away from him as possible, far enough that Albo apparently needed to take a packed lunch.
That's kind of funny. That's kind of petty.
Yeah, he's like, I don't want to see you at all. But Albo uses his first speech in Parliament to talk about the importance of community services, wages, multiculturalism, reconciliation, defending unions, and defending the working class. In 2016, Albo dryly described it as the sorts of issues you could change a few words around and talk about the current government. In 2024, Yanni dryly described it as the same thing again, but now. Look, he follows up on his Howard comments in a 1997 speech attacking Winston directly, and it reminds me of the 8 Mile scene. This guy's a gangster. His real name's Clarence, that battle. I was hoping to get you to read this one out for us, Karen, in your best Albo voice.
All right. You can trim the eyebrows, you can cap the teeth, you can cut the hair, you can put on different glasses, you can give him a used milk facial for all I care. But to paraphrase a gritty Australian saying, same stuff, different bucket. Here is a man who lived at home until he was 32. Young Australians demonstrating against the Vietnam War, listening to the Doors, driving their tie-dyed vans. And what was the Prime Minister doing? He was at home with Mum, wearing his shorts and long white socks, listening to Pat Boone and waiting for the Saturday night church dance. This is the man we have leading this country. Yesterday's man, a weak man, a little man, a man without courage, and a man without vision.
This is Billy McMahon in short pants, because this is the man who's brought the full force of his personality to bear on Australia.
He's really going hard at Johnny Boy there.
Honestly, just fucking read him for filth. Scalp him.
I mean, you can't, there's not any hair to grab onto scalp.
I mean, you can't scalp a bald man, but you could scalp his eyebrows.
And that's why that kind of violent rhetoric is why Albo got some pushback for this body shaming of Howard.
Damn liberals, so woke.
Trish Draper, member from Macon, said, "The Flower Power movement was backlash against people being judged and excluded on the basis of gender, disabilities, religion, age, economic status, and, yes, appearance."
Oh, geez. I hope it worked. I really hope it worked.
The Australian people endorsed Howard's worldview until 2007, so suck shit, Albo. Maybe ban more guns. Like gun control, a fun topic to talk about on a first date is voluntary assisted dying.
Woo! Woo! Hot.
Nothing gets me wetter than euthanasia, and Albo is a proud supporter of it. Back in 95, the Northern Territory had passed the Rights of the Terminally Ill Act, which legalized euthanasia in the Northern Territory. In 97, Albanese is in Parliament passionately arguing against a bill reversing this act, with wider implications on territorial sovereignty. I oppose this bill because I support human dignity. I sound like JFK. Could you read that one out for me?
Because I support human dignity. I oppose this bill because I support human dignity, freedom of choice, and civil liberties. I oppose this bill because my Christian upbringing taught me that compassion is important. I do not oppose the bill because of the issue of states' rights. I oppose it because I support voluntary euthanasia and I've got the guts to say it.
And critical support for him here. And the voting on this bill is going to be a conscience vote. That basically means that party members don't have to vote with the way the parties decided. Most of the time in Parliament, you don't do this, but every once in a while, you do. Anthony's Catholicism here manifests in an interesting way. To be clear, he describes himself as a cultural Catholic, demurring on the big guy specifically, and identifies with the principles of Catholic social justice. And to him, this means he personally supports bodily autonomy. He's been consistent in his supports for abortion rights, queer rights, and of course, euthanasia. But he also has a deep respect for religiously held beliefs. You might remember Lindsay, one of his dearest friends, his friend from the council earlier on. And Lindsay is planning on voting no to the voluntary assisted dying bill. And Albo says, there are probably very few people in this house with whom I would have greater political affinity than Lindsay, who is sitting at the table. I disagree with him on this issue, but I respect his right to be wrong on this occasion.
Aw, how boys are fighting.
They don't really fight about this. This isn't important.
Okay, good.
They disagree, but he's like, it's fine. I mean, he does say it's arrogant to suggest the ability to exercise conscience should be taken from a seriously ill patient who wants to die, and there is nothing moral about our exercising a free conscience vote as members of Parliament and then voting to deny others the right to exercise their conscience. But Lindsay's his mate, you know?
Okay, that's good. I don't want to lose Lindsay. Not our Linz.
We're not losing Lindsay. Euthanasia is re-illegalized in the Northern Territory, with 4 people getting to voluntarily assisted die in the brief time before it was made murder again. Albo's old enemy, Leo McClay, is one of more than a few Labour members who support the bill. It's close in the Senate, but gets up easy in the House. Despite the loss, Albo was campaigning hard behind the scenes for the no vote, while drawing up plans and drumming up support for his gay superannuation policy that he plans to present the next day.
Woo! What?
He's going to use the Parliament open mic, which is known formally as the adjournment debate, to advocate that same-sex partners should have the same rights to each other's superannuation as different sex partners.
The hets.
The unlike sex partners, because they don't like it.
They hate sex partners. Can you imagine? Just like, yeah, my sexuality is I don't like the person I'm with.
I really try to avoid the person that I'm bound to have sex with as much as I can. That's my sexuality.
I'd fuck them, but I don't like them.
Anyway, he calls out the superannuation policy that exists as unfair. And again, he bodies Johnny Boy in the chamber. If you could read this little quote out.
It's disturbing, but probably not surprising to see in retrospect that when John Howard claimed that he stood for all of us, he only meant the white middle-class Anglo-Saxon employed members of nuclear families like himself. Certainly not gay and lesbian people.
John Howard doesn't care about gay people, but like Mike Myers is there. Albo's looking to make coalitions with people who can be convinced on the same sorts of things and push them in the same direction as him. Voluntary assisted dying and the rights of same-sex couples will crop up again and again. The rights of people to live in relative peace and relative quiet. But you know what isn't relatively quiet?
Is it airport noise?
Yes, it's planes zooming overhead all hours of the day. Despite some minor amendments by the Howard government, Albo's electorate can't block out the hum. Nor can Albo's old foe, Leo McClay, whose move to a different electorate didn't get him out of the flight path. So, Albo wants some time on TV to explain the merits of the bill during question time for all to see. This is the 90s, so people are still watching question time, let alone TV in general.
I do know, my mum watched a bit of question time, and it was mainly because she, worked in government offices, but, I remember seeing question time and being like, this is boring.
Question time was when you're having a sick day and you're starting to feel a bit better. Question time will be on.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
You feel sick during Alan, and then by the time question's on, you're a bit better.
Yeah. Or you're sick for a different reason, you know? Sick to death of this shit.
And Albo is sick to death of the noise, and so is Leo. So Leo uses his spot in Question Time to ask Anthony Albanese to explain the benefits of the airport noise capping bill. Telling it straight recalls the absolute scenes that follow. I thank the member for Watson, he replied as the place descended into pandemonium. I thank the member for Watson, he replied as the place descended into pandemonium. I am particularly pleased that he got to ask this question today as my colleague and friend over many years.
Oof. Deep respect.
He's doing bipartisanship, and in some early bipartisan infrastructure work, he ends up working with Joe Hockey to finally figure out the airport issue, as the planes were also flying over Hockey's much richer electorate on the other side of Sydney Harbour. Joe and Albo are going to collaborate a few times over the years, and Joe describes the time glowing him. I like him, and he'll always be welcome in my home. The author then asked if Albo had ever been in his home. No, Joe admits.
Fuck me. That is so silly little rabbit coded, you know?
That faux pas aside, the relationship with Joe Hockey is one of many powerful little connections he forms over the years, in startlingly genuine ways. A trip to Palestine seems like a pivotal point in all three of these men's lives. Joe's father, born in Bethlehem, came on the trip, and Joe remembers him getting along really well with Albo. At one point, Joe, Albo, Leo McClay, and Joe's dad, Rich, are standing in a shed that housed 8 Palestinians. Albo is crying when Rich turns to his son, gesturing at the horrific conditions, and says, "There, but for the grace of God, I would have gone." Joe Hockey's father is Palestinian. So he's a Bethlehem Armenian, but his...
What the fuck?
Yeah, Joe Hockey's POC. Like Bob Catter.
You can't just drop this shit on me. Like, I've been...
Joe Hockey's woke.
You can't be called Joe Hockey and...
Joe Wokey. Woke Hockey.
And so you're telling me that all three of these guys, plus Joe's dad, went to Palestine?
Yeah, they did. In the early 2000s, they end up forming the Parliamentary Friends of Palestine Committee. And Joe is, moroseful when he talks about his friendship and relationship with Albo. He says, that's one of the relationships that was genuine, and I'm sort of sad that I didn't put more effort into it. He talks about seeing Albo crying when talking to his dad and just realizing, this is someone I really care about. Which is weird, because he's never had him in his house. Doesn't that sound a little lonely for Joe? Do you remember Christopher Pine?
I know of Christopher Pine. Christopher Pine.
Christopher Pine. Look, I hate that guy, but he has a similarly weirdly touching relationship with Albo. It's a rare relationship. I have no other friend in the Labour Party. Despite calling him too emotional and an unreconstructed lefty in the same interview, he says, Albo never resorted to personal attacks and enjoyed the game of politics for what it was. Years later, after leaving politics, he said of his relationship with Albo, "Our word is our bond."
That is so dramatic.
Yeah, our word is our bond is bro, you're Christopher Pine.
And also just, what is Anthony Albanese to these people? He's just their little, soft boy best friend, you know? He's like a main character that swans around and they're like, wow, he's my best friend. I'm going to support him on his journey. Love this guy. And Albo's like, oh, right. Yeah, Joe and Chris. Good to see yous. We'll grab coffee sometime, knowing full well he's not doing it. What the fuck?
Someone early talks about, you always have these conversations in politics with people about their kids, but you never actually meet any of their kids, and Albo's really good at remembering people's kids' names. I can't remember the exact quote, but it was about that. He's good at this side of acting things.
The kind of talking and being oh, look, I remember something about you. Now we have a personal connection. But this is just stored up in his weird little numbers brain. He's got a smaller folder up there that says words and an even smaller subset that has names in it. Yeah. And then he's okay, kid's name. Oh, and how is Emily? Oh my God, you remembered my daughter's name, Emily. Of course, how could I forget Emily? I love Emily. She's such a bright young spark. She should get into politics. Oh, thank you, Albo. That's so sweet. Yes, of course. No problem. Sorry, what was your name?
Albo's never forgotten a name. And he never forgets the game of politics. But you know who hates the game of politics?
Who hates the game of politics?
We've heard from him once today, if you've been listening to the episode and heard the theme song.
Is it Bob?
It is Bob Catter. Bob Catter says about politicians, these people will love the downtrodden and then grovel to the rich. But even Bob has glowing things to say about Albo, at least in 2016. He has what's called the common touch. I have immense respect for Albo. You can only describe his performance as brilliant. We're good friends, Anthony and I. I certainly like Anthony and regard him as a bloody good friend, and I wouldn't say that of too many people in federal parliament, I can tell you.
Let 1,000 blossoms bloom.
And especially the blossom of Bob and Albo's friendship. Albo says, I actually like him, while I don't agree with all his views about Bob.
And, like, fair cop, here's the thing. I think I don't really agree with Bob Catter on most things. I agree that he is exactly how he presents himself to be. I don't think there's any artifice in that man. He's just like that, and I kind of appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, to be said about Bob Catter is that he is actually quite popular amongst a lot of people in, like, the Torres Strait and such. Like, he's a weird guy. We'll have to look into him one day, but we're going to move on from him right now because Albo can't stop making fucking friends. Him and Alan Griffin, the member for Bruce, have a flat in Queanbeyan that they've called Grozny, after the Chechen capital, because it was as clean as the war-ravaged city.
He lived in Queanbeyan?
Yeah, they had a flat called Grozny.
The worst thing about being Canberra locals is knowing, like, a little bit of lore about Queanbeyan, you know? And I think that's really funny that he lived there.
Remember when our friend lived down the street from the place that got, like, a sword pulled on it? The gas station sword incident?
Yes.
And it was like, oh yeah, Queanbeyan.
Do you remember when Queanbeyan got really excited because they were getting a cinema?
That was huge, though. Like, to be fair for Queanbeyan, that was huge. They wouldn't have to drive 20 minutes into Canberra.
God damn it.
A different city with a different thing. So they've, Albo and Griffo, as he's called, they've established, I'm going to quote here, the fun faction. And they've gained renown for their cover of K-San at 3 a.m. You know who's sleeping on this couch in Grozny, in Queanbeyan? Dan Andrews, the future Melbourne guy from COVID. Remember him?
Dan fucking Andrews.
He's on the couch while they're, you know, hitting that Hong Kong mattress all night long.
Fuck. What kind of share house is this?
It's Grozny. They're going to end up forming a parody band one day called The Poets. Albo, Griffo, Bronwyn Bishop, and a Labour minister with a past as a musician. We've spoken about him before, but I don't know what to tell you right now. The only friends Albo can't make is, like, the soft left and the Greens. It's a rabbit hole we're not going to be diving down today because we'll find everyone in Australian politics. But basically, during the time that Albo is getting his parliamentary friends, he's allied with the hard left. We've spoken about this as opposed to the soft left. The hard left are union secretaries, political staffers, lobbyists, and student police. The soft left are suburban branch activists, although he does call upon his close friendship with the soft left's Mark Butler to get some support. To really consolidate the power of the hard left, he pursues alliances with such colourful figures as Joe Tripodi, who has sexual assault, domestic violence, cash-based branch stacking, and significant corruption allegations, and Eddie Obeid, one of Australia's richest politicians and the owner of many properties that get government contracts. It's Eddie Obeid's beach house in Terrigal that leads to the name of the terrifying Terrigal sub-faction, the right-wing Labour goons that were known as power brokers.
That was a lot to take in. So what, like, just like a fucking criminal and a guy who just, like, I suppose is spiritually a criminal.
I think he's also literally a criminal.
Fair enough, yeah.
But that's like domestic violence stuff.
Oh,
More like money crimes.
yeah, I guess so.
He's Albo's got married during this time to Carmel, and they've had their ceremony at Taronga Park.
Did they really?
Yeah, at the zoo.
God damn it. I would love to get married at the zoo. When we get married again, we'll go to a zoo, maybe. Maybe after. I don't want you know what? I don't think I want the animals invited to our wedding.
You don't want a giraffe to be our ring bearer? He just like leans down.
With his massive tongue?
Yeah, and he just like leans down and goes like, here's your ring. Blah.
Okay, new plan. We're getting married at the zoo.
Look, it sounds really nice, but they end up splitting up before they die. So it turns out it was a waste of time. That's probably mean. Look, I don't mean that.
I mean, like, look, are you wrong?
I am. Look, his son Nathan is going to be born later in 2000, and they give him the middle name Matthew after Carmel's late brother, who died in a, say it with me, car crash.
Another fucking car crash?
A lot of car crashes in this story.
He's just like allergic to cars, or he wronged a car in a past life, and now every car is trying to kill him, all the people around him.
And reminding him about it. And he can't, he's taunting them. He's like, you kill one of us, I'll name my son after him.
Let me just my dad died in a car crash. I've been hit by multiple cars. I was named after my uncle who died in a car crash.
Yeah. Folks, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you about the car crashes. About Carmel, I can tell you she has a storied political career of her own. But oh no.
Her name has car in it. Of course it wasn't going to work out.
All right, of course. Oh my God. Which car crash was the worst? The Mel crash or the... Listen, this car crash of a political career of Carmel's. No, she does pretty well. We'll hear from her again when she comes up screeching against one of Albo's enemies. Another woman with a storied political career of her own is Tanya Plibersek. And I want to make clear, both Tanya and Albo strongly deny that Albo's level of support behind the scenes was considerably more extensive and prompted allegations of patronage during the 97 pre-selection for the seat of Sydney. Albo having a bunch of friends in the electorate that stumped for Tanya is unrelated. The incumbent Peter Baldwin, him of being bashed, is retiring, and Tanya's going up against Chrissa Lucas to fill the vacuum. Chrissa has some heavies behind her. Gough Whitlam is the highlight, but Gough's wife, Margaret, supports Tanya, and in the end, it's Tanya who runs home with pre-selection and eventually the seat of Sydney. Whether his support was extensive or not, and it's controversial at the time, they have a long-standing relationship in the Labour Party, but an increasingly strained friendship to this day. Albo is about to be appointed to the front bench of the opposition, and we start to see his growing tendency to adjust his rhetoric towards Parliament, making moral concessions in the process. At a rally supporting Palestinians in Martin Place, he tells it like it is. The response of Israel has been to meet children throwing rocks with helicopters, with tanks, and with missiles. Crikey found a corresponding moment in Parliament that same week, with one crucial difference. Palestinian teenagers should not be throwing rocks, but the fact that they are does not justify an army shooting at unarmed civilians.
Yeah, because when you talk about it to people, and you can, say all the righteous things, that's well and good. But then when you're at work, you do have to say, all of a sudden, apparently, teenagers who misbehave should be shot with fucking rockets.
I mean, he's saying that they shouldn't be, but they shouldn't be misbehaving. We have to do something about these rock-throwing teenagers.
And given the state of current Australian politics and, adult time, adult crime, whatever.
Adult time? Adult crime.
Oh, you want adult time? Well, that's an adult crime. Woo, woo, woo.
Folks, I'm being arrested. Look, in public statements on the issue, he's been fairly consistent to this increasingly tenuous line. Israel has the right to exist within the 1967 borders and the right to defend those borders, but not to all the rest of the things they've done since then. And he describes it as an extraordinary compromise in the name of peace on behalf of Palestinians. So he still has some socialist trappings at this point. He makes statements against unchecked globalization. He notes that Israel initially funded Hamas during a House speech and repeatedly advocates for the establishment of a Palestinian state within the drawn-up borders. But at some point between now and when he comes back into power, he stops mentioning Israel. So it's 2001. Albo's still a shadow minister, and the South Sydney Rabbitohs have been a professional rugby league team since 1908. They debuted a few months before the birth of Don Bradman. They have, to date, won 21 premierships, more than any other team, and have been runners-up 14 times, topping the ladder in 17 of all of those seasons. They're one of only 2 remaining foundational New South Wales rugby league clubs left in the NRL, traditionally based in inner South Sydney, headquartered in Redfern. In the 2001 season, they are in the running to place nowhere. They're not there. Rupert Murdoch and News Limited have decided they don't make enough money, and if they don't want to merge with Cronulla, they are out.
Oh shit, not our rabbit boys.
Not our rabbit boys. And Albo's in Parliament by this point. He's about to be promoted to the front bench. He's got some weight. A lot is happening in the world, but none is more important than the South Sydney Rabbitohs. The decision by the National Rugby League to exclude South Sydney from the 2000 competition leaves the faceless men who run the game with red and green blood on their hands, which, given the red is already blood, I don't understand what the green blood is.
The green blood of the rabbits that were very sick.
Contradictions aside, the move is popular. It catches the attention of Russell Crowe, best known for being the cousin of Martin Crowe, New Zealand Test cricketer. Our man Joe Hockey, I quote, doesn't want to see the Souths go the way of the Norths, which is up, I guess. But he's in to help any way he can, turning this issue into a bipartisan one. Albo threatens a News Limited executive with continuing litigation, and it's found by the federal court that the NRL breached the Trade Practices Act, and the Souths were back by June of 2001. Another big win for bipartisanship.
Thank God sports is there to bring us together.
Thank fuck. During this period, Albo's gained his reputation as a people's prime minister. Wait, people's politician. The cause to which he's been attached the longest is the queer rights, with the superannuation rights for same-sex couples as his specific needle to the sitting government. Albo views it pragmatically, as a step towards same-sex marriage, a cause he's explicitly advocated for throughout his career and life. His view is that since civil partnerships between homosexual couples were already allowed, Australian people would be amenable to essentially an administrative change at no cost to the Australian government. In Albo's view, this would help normalize same-sex relationships further, paving the way for the same-sex marriage legislation that he wanted. Penny Wong, who becomes close to Albo around this time, describes his motivation and a belief as a belief in equality, and that he's been consistent about that. His efforts here do work, with the Howard government agreeing to amend the superannuation law, although they managed to take credit for it.
Yeah, pretty standard.
In opposition, he also attacks the Howard government on their nuclear dreams, despite some Labour amenability to it, Indigenous rights, and the airport noise runway thing. Although he supports the intervention in Afghanistan after those planes or whatever, he warns against going into Iraq. He finds the Saddam Hussein regime abhorrent, but he says they're no more abhorrent than Israel, despite the right of Israel to exist within secure borders. When Australia joins the US and UK on their Babylon getaway, he says it sends a message that reaffirms Australia is part of the old white Anglo-Christian order, something he's never going to do.
Yeah, and here we are to this day.
To this day. Marianne dies in 2002, his mum. It's obviously an important, difficult moment in his life. We're not going to go into his death and the funeral and so on. Her death, sorry. We're not going to go into his death either, because it hasn't happened yet. When she dies, Kevin Rudd is one of the people to reach out to Albo. We were both the product of debilitatingly ill Catholic working class single mums, who took their religion and responsibility seriously. Kevin's dad died in a car crash when he was a teenager.
Shut up! How many people died in car crashes back then?
So, I think about, who's the guy who did Mad Max? George R.R. Martin. And I remember he said once, in America, their young men kill each other with guns. In Australia, our young men kill each other with cars.
And you know what? That kind of tracks.
And that being George Michael's inspiration for Mad Max. It's a George, right?
I'm pretty sure it's George.
George Washington's Mad Max. So another unlikely friendship forms between the two young members, publicly criticizing the sub-factionalization and labor together. And Kewin Liu will be obviously showing up again in about 5 years. Kewin Liu is his Chinese name.
Oh, shit. I was like, wait, who the fuck is Kewin Liu?
Yeah, it's Kevin Rudd's Chinese name.
Fuck, nice.
So by 2003, Albo's in the education and training portfolio. And while his main job is meant to be the education and training of the country, he's certainly not forgoing his responsibilities to train his successors in the Labour Party. The seat of Canterbury in the New South Wales state election is always going to be a safe Labour seat. The incumbent, Kevin Moss, is retiring, and Albo gets one of his old friends and mentees into the role, Linda Burney. Linda becomes the first Indigenous member of New South Wales State Parliament and continues to be a close ally to Albo to this day. Among education, dental care, and exports, her maiden speech includes some devastating lines. I met my father, Noddy Ingram, in 1984, when I was 28. His first words to me were, "I hope I don't disappoint you." Albo was moved to tears, something that Bernie describes as instructive about Albo. He, more than any other man that I can think of, actually shows his emotions in that way.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. He does seem like he wears his heart on his sleeve a lot, and I think that is a bit of a symptom of growing up, like, with seeing a lot of suffering and also getting really into kind of leftist uni stuff. And, that certain musician's music is very politically charged, and I can imagine that had a pretty profound impact on him.
It probably did, whoever that musician was. I can't remember. But it might come up later. Okay. And yeah, he's a hothead, a bit of a hothead. He's got a reputation as a bit of a head kicker.
Oh, his head's hot? That's crazy, because it's usually bare.
We talked earlier about Tanya Plibersek, but there's more than a few women in the Labour Party who Albo supported in their early careers. Karen describes it in her book as such. Far from denying his influence in identifying and assisting fellow left-wingers, and especially women into politics, Anthony celebrates it. It means he has also conveniently established a network of people beholden to him for their success. Is an interesting way to see it, especially in a mostly complimentary book about Albo. It does sound a bit nefarious.
Just a little bit. It's kind of like, oh, I'm doing the right thing, but you owe me, right? Like a big favor, because I did you a big favor. So, when I come calling, you better pay up.
Meredith Bergman, who's been in the New South Wales Legislative Council since the 90s, credits Albo for convincing her to enter politics in the first place. Hey, Karen, do you remember Bergman College at ANU?
Yes, unfortunately.
And do you remember, the Bergman High School in Canberra?
Yes, also, I guess, unfortunately.
They're named after Meredith's grandfather.
Oh.
Meredith's father was the chairman of the CSIRO for a while.
Oh, shit, really?
Her nephew is Charles Firth from The Chaser.
Really?
Just a weird big family I didn't know about.
All right, Australian media legacy, let's go.
That's the Bergmans. It's a nice friend to have, Meredith. And another nice friend to have is your wife. And in 2005, Albo's wife Carmel becomes the member for Marrickville in the New South Wales Legislative Assembly.
My wife is my best friend.
My husband's my best friend.
Yay.
Carmel and Albo met doing politics, and her career has been progressing smoothly until this point. She parlays a seat on the Marrickville Council to the deputy mayorhood in 1995, and was appointed to the Legislative Assembly in 1998 before something, she's in the Marrickville by-election 2005. She wins pretty easily, although a huge swing to the Greens candidate, Mayor Sam Byrne, must have raised some eyebrows in the two-politician household. But we're going to go back federal. And so much of what's happening is either Mark Latham or faction wars. We're going to cover it one day, but Albo describes Latham as somebody who you could occasionally have a beer with, which I think is a great way to be described.
It's like, yeah, small doses, man, small doses.
Every once in a while, you can get a good time with him. Mark Latham's having dinner with Albo and some journalists in Canberra, and he goes on some kind of tirade about asylum seekers. Albo gets at him by calling it his Osama bin Latham moment.
What the fuck?
Osama bin Latham.
Oh, fuck.
And women bin shopping.
It sounds like Osama bin Latham.
Riotous laughter.
Fuck. They were probably in Kingston too.
I think they might have been in the city, but I don't have a reason for thinking that. Latham and Albo disagree over the airport. Mark has a spot that he wants the airport to go, the new airport they might build, and Albo thinks it's silly. They disagree about parliamentary pensions. Mark wants to cut them, and Albo thinks it's unfair. And they disagree about whether Mark Latham should lead the Labour Party. As leader of the Labour Party, we do get some hot fire from Mark. The Liberal Party are busy wrapping themselves in the flag, questioning patriotism, destroying reputations, stacking courts, bashing gays, and appealing to racism. Mark also tries to pull Howard's arm out. He has a very unpopular promise to save some Tasmanian forests, gets in trouble for wanting to pull troops out of Iraq, and oh my god, there is so much in the lore here. We could spend a week talking about the Mark Latham Labour Party. We will do that, but we won't today. They lose the election, and Latham stays on as leader. Nobody else wants to do it. He gives Albanese his dream environment portfolio, and then he gets pancreatitis, he shaves his head, and he leaves the Labour Party in a dramatic media conference.
Damn, okay. Damn.
There's a tragic story somewhere in the abyss of Mark Latham. Interfacing with what he seemed to be like prior to Labour leadership, I think the furthest reflection in a room of mirrors smiles back at him. But the ones in between are the ones we'll speak about one day.
Fucking hell. All right. Damn.
It's 2005 and Kim Beazley's back.
Kim.
Although that's a move back towards Labour right, Albo supports it, as nothing is more important than the unity of the party. But Kevin 07 and Julesy have the numbers for a takeover. It's tragic, apparently. The mood was pretty somber. We told Kim we'd done a count, and he knew he wasn't going to get there. And Albo always knows his numbers.
Numbers king, let's go. Count, boy.
And he knows his number's going to Kim, for loyalty reasons, even though he's best friends with Kev. Afterwards, Albo and the other friends of the, quote, vanquished Kim walk back to Kim Beazley's office. And once they're there, the day gets even better. Kim's brother has just died.
Holy fuck. Seriously?
Yeah, like right after he gets kicked out. It's described as a veil-shattering moment for politics or whatever. It's fine, he would have been dead now anyway, it's whatever. The lead up to the 2007 election, we're actually here now, was huge. And we'll cover it more one day at the return of Rod, but we're going to talk about privatizing electricity. It's not popular to do it, despite all the propaganda, and it's not the kind of thing Labour wants people to know they're going to do. The soft left, Bryce Gaudry, who's held the seat of Newcastle for Labour since 91, is going into the election as an independent. He's a classic Labour type, anti-war, unionist, community-focused, and most importantly, consistently winning. And he blew the whistles on Labour's plans to privatise New South Wales electricity. In return, the New South Wales Labour government, and it's implied that Albo is involved with this, but a lot of these machinations are informal and opaque, dump him and they install Jody McKay of the far right. Thanks partially to $49,000 in undeclared donations from local property developers, Jody takes the seat. The fallout of this echoes far. 130 ALP members who supported Gaudry were kicked out, and Jody ends up losing the seat to the Liberal Party in 2011, and the New South Wales electricity grid was privatised.
Yay! What was the point of all of that? That's so... We spent so much time wasted, you know?
Yeah, just kicking out this guy, installing a lady, losing the seat, and privatizing the electricity. It's like, who's happy about this?
Yeah, congratulations. You schemed and, you know, some stuff went wrong, but you still succeeded. Yay.
You turned 130 people who are in favor of transparency away from... Look, it's whatever. In Karen Middleton's book, Albo draws a line between his loyalty to the Labour government and fucking football. Labour is a part of who I am. It's not just a sort of belief, it's a part of who you are. Like you don't contemplate going for a team other than South Sydney either. Labour are the party that can form government. Why wouldn't you want to be part of determining the policy of people who could actually be in government rather than just protest?
Damn, King, like, go off, live your truth, but, like, I couldn't give a fuck.
Neither, and I think this is where we get to, like, at the end of the day, I didn't want this to be the thing, but I don't think it's so much that Albo believes in Albo. He really believes that there's nothing more important than a Labour victory, because there's a hole in his heart that Catholicism left that I think Labour fills.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think, given that many of his father figures as well were Labour leadership types, that, you know, he grew up being around a lot of that kind of like unionist stuff, political stuff, you know, that it makes a lot of sense to me that that's his thing. He's like, yep, this is truth. This is what is real in the world. And if you disagree, you are shattering my reality.
And instead of God, he's got golf. Oh. In golf we trust.
Praise be to golf.
Rod takes Albo's prized environment portfolio right back from him and gives it to somebody we've met before, but I was being coy about his name. I wonder what went through Albo's mind when a childhood hero, a musician he followed around to shows, slept on the beach for, danced with and missed trains for, took his dream job. Peter Garrett, the Midnight Oil frontman turned conservationist and politician.
I'm just wondering, you're white, middle class, you studied to be a lawyer, where's the oppression? What is the political stance?
We get as angry as our friends and our mates do about the fact that our environment is being destroyed by multinational corporations.
Yes, Peter! Peter Garrett, Peter Garrett, Peter Garrett.
The only, like, the one of the most entertaining, and I don't mean, like, I think he was actually quite useful in certain things, probably, but very entertaining person to have around.
No, absolutely. And I know, like, to this day, if Peter Garrett makes an appearance at, like, you know, a government office or goes around Parliament House, like, all the fucking staffers are so hyped. They're like, oh, fuck, Peter's here? And they'll come and get pictures and stuff. Like, people fucking love him, as they should.
As they should. And Albo loves him, but he claims that he never thought letting Garrett do the environment job was a good idea because of the potential outsized influence of the environmental movement on Garrett. He says, like, I always knew it wouldn't work. He says this to Peter, and Pete doesn't give a fuck. And here's one thing about Peter Garrett. He's not in a faction. He was too busy being salad fingers on stage, so he doesn't give a fuck about any of this.
Hello there, chaps.
Somebody's owed a portfolio because of a favor? Too bad. This or that legacy figure wants changes made? Sorry, who? Garrett, when interviewed for the Albo book, said interesting things. The thing I like about Albo is that he's got a heart, like a real heart. You know, he really does feel some things quite deeply. He's had some setbacks along the way and things that he's had to deal with. He's pretty good at brushing controversy and all that sort of stuff off. He's learned to do that well, but he's very hardworking. He's a very capable Polly. He's not a sinner in my book, but you couldn't describe him as a saint.
Yeah, I think that's pretty measured, actually. Like, again, Peter Garrett being a real one.
Yeah.
Truth, speak that truth.
He's doing his best. And, like, that's, I think, one of the few people who doesn't view him as his best friend in the world.
And you know why he doesn't view him as his best friend? It's because he was a musician and made actual friends instead of being a politician who is typically friendless because they're a big fucking dork that no one likes.
Damn, just a vis. I mean, it's true, though. Like, Peter Garrett probably has, like, people he hangs out with that aren't Labour factional members. And Albo has Lindsay.
If all of your friends are your co-workers, like, that's a fucking problem.
That's a fucking nerd right there. But we have a little detour before we get to politics again, because we haven't checked in on the South Sydney Rabbitohs since 2001, when Albo was still a shadow minister. Since their readmission, they have come second to last, third to last, and last. Folk hero George Piggins is still there, whose name still emblazons the club's Best in Season award, but the reputation is in tatters. Players were being signed because they were someone's mate. Off-field controversies were probably the normal NRL thing, but it certainly wasn't helping. In 2007, Russell Crowe and one of his new friends, Peter Holmes-A-Court, were offering to buy the club and use the injection of cash to sign better players and improve the facilities, at the cost of the club's traditional membership losing control of the future of the Rabbitohs. At this stage, the Rabbitohs were one of very few holdouts in the NRL with a traditional membership-owned structure. We should probably familiarize ourselves with the Holmes-A-Court family, but now is not the time for that episode. Here's the basics. Robert Holmes-A-Court was born in South Africa and raised in then Rhodesia, and then accidentally invested $500,000 in WA wool. He had a loan of $500,000 forgiven from the government. The source of the initial investment is unclear, but one of his ancestors is really good friends with Cecil Rhodes, so you can imagine. His son Simon Holmes-A-Court runs the Climate 200 company that funded a lot of the Teal independence. Another son, Paul, is the largest pastoral landowner in the Northern Territory. And Peter, Russell's friend, is a loose fucking cannon. He had disputes with the ABC over an educational television show. He settled out of court with the rest of the Holmes-A-Courts to get his inheritance. And he ran the Australian Agricultural Company and relisted it on the stock exchange. And he has been kicked out of a bunch of companies for being shitty to work with.
Damn, okay. Fuck. Well, you know what? Like, yeah, rich family, somebody's got to be a dickhead. At least the others are kind of, I guess, what? They've got hobbies.
Yeah, they've got hobbies. And, like, this guy loves football, I guess. He has money. He has money, and they've got momentum for the buyout. They need a 3/4 majority from the membership, but Peter might have done this one in his life. Piggins claims that Russell Crowe hired a PI to surveil him and his family, and there's also allegations of shopped pornographic pictures of Piggins' wife. Piggins' framing of the situation, which unfortunately seems to be primarily a News Corp framing, is that the Rabbitohs' connection to unions and the CFMEU was what was being attacked. Albo is on hand to assure the members that selling the team will get them better players, better results, and a better reputation. Although dropping the cheer girls wasn't popular with the membership, the sight of Russell Crowe telling them to vote yes, let's get into bed together, I hope you respect me in the morning, was too much. The Souths were sold, and for some time the proof was in the pudding. The first team after the sale made the semi-finals, for the first time in 20 years. Less than 2 months after the NRL Grand Final, won by Melbourne against Manly, although they were eventually stripped of the title for money cheating, an arguably bigger win occurred when Kevin Rudd's Labour Party ripped the brows right out of John Howard's head and sent him back to his mum's place. Anthony Albanese becomes the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport, a new position, as well as Leader of the House, which seems to be the person who runs the stand-ups in the mornings and ensures regular stretch breaks and runs the office's Are You OK Day celebration.
All right, vibe. Moving on up in the world, King.
It's probably a stretch to say that Albo drew inspiration from the Rabbitohs' sale to the infrastructure ministry, but it does reinforce a current of his life. He was born in the year of the rabbit, and it only makes sense that he'd sell off a team dedicated to rabbit murder. In a September 2023 interview with Neil Mitchell, he said it outright. I believe in the market as a useful way to allocate resources. The interview actually got feisty for a while, with Neil trying to get Albo to say he's a socialist, and Albo not saying no, but certainly not saying yes. He's in favor of public-private partnerships and public-private competition. He gives the example of banks, which he doesn't want to nationalize, but does want to introduce a public option to regulate them. So one of the first moves of the Albostructure Ministry to facilitate this is to create Infrastructure Australia. This is designed as an independent body that will liaise with state and territory governments and advise on what infrastructure to build. In keeping with his long-termism, Albo wants to get big projects moving, so they have to be carried through. In an address to Public-Private Infrastructure Conference shortly after being sworn in, he gives 3 reasons for the importance of infrastructure: export potential, the development of major cities, and reducing carbon emissions. He links transport to climate change, a link apparently opposed by the coalition at the time, so go figure, and describes the opposition as frozen in time while the world warms around it. Around the same time, he went into a meeting with the CEO of the Sydney Airport Corporation, without the latter knowing he'd been made Minister for Transport. They were waiting there to square off with the member for Grayndler. And in walked the Minister for Transport. It was great. He wields his power to unfreeze plans to build another airport in Sydney to reduce the noise, although construction's delayed by the financial crisis till 2013. During the financial crisis in 2009, the Liberal Party is falling apart again. The dark years of the Tony Abbott Liberal Party are about to take hold, but Anthony's in Italy, meaning his father, Carlo Albanese. A series of coincidences led to Anthony being in Italy on official parliamentary business right near the town Carlo lived in, a town he found out because there was a box with his father's address in an old warehouse, and Carlo hasn't moved. He has a series of friends, for instance, the head of Carnival Cruises, the now owner of Carlo's ex-employer Fairski is a friend of his, Amanda Vanstone, the ambassador to Italy, is an old colleague, and his cousin works at the embassy in Rome. It's all so wonderful. At one point, a guy who works on boats checks pension records for old shipmen to confirm Carlo's birthday. It's quite the ride. It's crazy, honestly, all the things that kind of went into place for him to be reunited with his father.
Like, how do you even go about doing that? Like, because what? This guy, obviously, Albanese had never met him. You know, Mary knew him for, like, a little bit. And, like, maybe a scrap of information.
They just had his name and that he probably lived in Naples and that he worked for Fairski. It's the Fairski thing that ended up working because his friend who owns the cruise line that Fairski used to run was able to access old employee records, which included an address for Carlo at the time, which he still lived at.
Because, like, otherwise, how are you going to find, like, an old Italian man named Carlo? Like, how the fuck are you gonna, like, that's crazy.
And how would you know it's actually him?
Yeah, 100%.
And I have an answer for that. It's a sweet moment, and I hesitated to include it, but I teared up a little when I thought about it, so I felt dishonest admitting it. You remember the photo of Carlo and Marianne from earlier?
Yeah.
Albo's got it with him as some sort of proof that he's not a raving madman, and when he shows it to Carlo, the old Italian man gets an old, presumably Italian album off a disused shelf of memories and shows Albo the same picture right back.
No way. He got the picture too?
The same one.
Oh, that's actually so fucking sweet.
I know. It all goes well. Albo brings back the family next year in 2010, and they're like, wow, you're a politician. We don't trust that. But your wife is a busy businesswoman, but she's so nice, and you seem nice, and they all like him. And good for you, Albo. He has an aviation white paper released between these trips and earns him the title of Aviation Minister of the Year from the peak global body. He advocates for an increased efficiency in regulation, large-scale planning around expanding airports, and an aviation security regime to combat the threat of terrorism. Albo comes back to Australia and dives straight into mopping up some juicy drama. This passage in the book and in time reverberates through the rest of Albo's life. The civil war between Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, weeks of whispered rumors, Albo's counting, about the mess of trying to neoliberal the environment better through carbon tax. There's a bit of drumbeat around Kevin, says Albo, leading to Julia Gillard challenging Kevin for the leadership. Julia says that Anthony was agitated, personally agitated. And then Rudd drops out of the race last minute to save face for himself and for Labour. He finds Albo outside his office and says, Albo, look, it'll be all right. This is the biggest tragedy he's ever seen, if you ask Albo. His colleagues didn't respect the office of Prime Minister, and Kevin didn't have enough goodwill from the caucus members, and nobody had any backbone. It affects the long-term future of the Labour Party.
Yeah, and it actually fucking does. Like, he was right.
He was.
That whole shit show is why Labour is kind of a fucking joke, because they're all just going to stab each other. And then the Liberals started doing it. And it's like, you'll just have to if you pick a leader, you have to fucking stick with them. Don't be a baby.
Don't be a fucking bait. But that's, I mean, look, it's an undignified beginning to the Gillard administration, but it did lead to the most entertaining time to be following Australian politics.
Very true, actually. Wasn't there that like story where it's like, yeah, for a period of time, paramedics wouldn't ask you who the Prime Minister was because it was changing so fucking frequently. They were like, oh, this isn't a good determiner of whether you're mentally stable.
Yeah, it's like, who's the Prime Minister? It's like, yesterday or today? At least you're aware.
It's like, just name any one of them in the last like 6 months and we'll go with that.
Bill Shorten.
Well, now...
Look, Gillard's dealing with leaks. Did she backstab Kevin Rudd? Did she oppose paid parental leave? Did Kevin Rudd leak these things? Yes, he did. The 2010 election was a barn burner for messy bitches, with two recent coupers coming head-to-head and finishing neck and neck. The LNP and Labour both came away with 72 out of 150 seats. This is Abbott versus Gillard. Minority government, that is, having to listen to the far left of the party, traumatized Anthony Albanese. He's often referred to as being from the socialist side of the Labour Party, but the major breaks from the far left begin in earnest during this time. In 2011, he writes a piece in The Australian criticizing the Marrickville mayor, Greens candidate Fiona Byrne, for proposing a boycott of Israeli goods. His piece starts with a gotcha about going to a Leonard Cohen concert, which probably slaps if you really like Triple J. And at the end of it, he says, it's lucky Cohen didn't try to perform at the Enmore Theatre, because there would have been a pogrom, I think is what he's kind of saying. The piece is called Beyond the Pale, presumably a reference to the ghettoization of the Jewish community in Tsarist Russia, who lived in the Pale. Doesn't matter that Marrickville is in the federal seat of Grandler, Albo's seat, and as we've covered, is currently held by his wife. Albanese went to Murdoch Press for all of this, and none of them even mentioned their relationship, so it's probably fine. And it's probably fine that Kevin Rudd might have descended onto a Chinese restaurant in Marrickville to lie and fearmonger about Greens coming for Chinese goods next. It's probably fine that Labour's Luke Foley goes on the record calling Fiona an extremist. It's probably fine that an independent group of market researchers were doing a survey purported to be on behalf of Marrickville City Council asking voters if they would still vote for her given she had instigated a boycott against Israel. It's probably fine that Carmel Tebbett, as deputy mayor, had presided over and voted for a similar resolution banning doing business with Myanmar. It's probably fine what Israel was doing in 2011, and it's probably good that nobody did anything to try and stop them. Anyway. Around this time, and probably unrelatedly, he describes Australia's alliance with the USA as fundamental to our security and a cornerstone of stability in the Asia-Pacific. Although Obama was there, and so I imagine he had cum in his pants or something. Wow, Barack Obama. Can you believe it?
Oh, jeez.
That's the first ever black man that could read.
Fuck me.
It's in this time that he really consolidates his relationships with Labour right, and after doing all this reading, I've come around to Jacobin's position on him. Albo's hard left credentials give him a unique ability to quell rank-and-file resistance, while at the same time making deals with the right of the Parliamentary Labour Party. His seemingly infinite patience for religiously held beliefs of the Judeo-Christian sort, if you know what I mean, gives him the tact to grant concessions to Labour right. Although he says enough to keep Labour left interested, especially about some of the things he believes, anything further than that is not a religiously held belief, and thus not worthy of Albo's respect at time. And maybe that's why the resistance is mounting close to home for Albo. Though he wins his seat in 2010, the Greens got to within 4% of him. The unholy alliance with the Liberal Party that birthed the Teal independence is rearing its ugly head. And they are attacking him directly in the lead up to the 2013 election, with an eye on unseating him. The Greens challenger describes seeing palpable disgust about Albo's asylum seeker plans, to which Albo calls him a fringe dweller unprepared for the realities of politics. You gotta stay in politics, even if you're torturing people on an island somewhere to do so. It's complicated. To be fair, his reputation for pushing through these long-term projects that he stays in politics for seems to be growing. In 2012, he's named Minister of the Year by Infrastructure Investor, which is a magazine, published by the PEI, the only global B2B information group focused exclusively on private equity, real estate, debt, infrastructure, and agri-investing.
Wow, prestigious.
They buy farms. You hear that? And they celebrate his achievement and his investment in mining communities, his passion for economic growth, and the legacy of making infrastructure Australia. They laud his work facilitating the construction of the Moorebank Intermodal Terminal. Albo pushed for a $570 million government investment against the advice of Infrastructure Australia, who wanted it fully privately built. The Journal says it serves to highlight the independence of Infrastructure Australia, which is a creative take to say the least. The terminal is going to make rail transport easier, mainly for freight between Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane, and hopefully reduce carbon emissions and traffic congestion by getting a bunch of trucks off the road.
Yeah, that's a really interesting take to be like, yeah, it's really good that the independent body could voice their, their concerns and their disagreements, and that the minister could ignore it anyway because it doesn't fucking matter.
Because they're independent. It shows their independence. They will be ignored.
Yeah, independent and alone.
He backs all this up by representing Australia at a roundtable talk in Singapore on the future of global aviation. He makes a friend here, an extremely senior member of the Australian aviation industry, who describes Albo as a very good minister. He understood the way aviation was changing. We'll come back to this man later. I didn't want to cover him, but it came up in the news. But first, we have a recurring character moment. It's surprising that, of all people, Barnaby Joyce stood up to the Liberal Party to stop them attacking Albo, but I promise the context will make it make sense.
BJ!
Again, voice of reason, BJ.
Holy shit.
See, Albo, he'd been having a beer with Craig Thompson, a Labour MP, a union secretary, and a man under internal strife in the party. And Christopher Pine says that Barnaby's the one who talked him out of really going after Albo. They really could have torn him apart if they wanted. I mean, you can't be having a beer with a guy who used union money on escorts in the Red Turbo Spa room. This is something that Barnaby thought you shouldn't be making fun of, because a man's entitled to do that. And Barnaby went up in Albo's estimation by understanding Albo's support of his friend.
Wow, Barnaby Joyce.
I understand. He had to see those hookers.
And...
with union money.
Yeah.
What else is it for?
Yeah, nothing else.
The union of me and a hooker.
Yeah, exactly. Now that's a beautiful union.
That's a beautiful union, and Albo's making sure his union with powerful Jewish advocates is also beautiful. See, in 2000, he'd drawn the ire of Australian Jewish news for supporting a UN peacekeeping force, tasked with ending the day-to-day killing in Israel. But by 2013, Australian Jewish news has a more nuanced view of what Albo's relationship to Israel is. The then executive director of the Jewish Affairs Council described Albo's development of a more nuanced understanding of the Middle East over the last decade, noting his opposition to terrorist fanaticism, particularly relevant to contemporary Iran, and appreciating his firm opposition to BDS that we described earlier, BDS being the boycott, divest, and sanction movement that the Greens wanted to implement in Marrickville. The BDS opposition was huge for him, as the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, which is their name, not mine, also cited it, along with his support for the right of the State of Israel to exist as a Jewish state with security. The Zionist Federation of Australia think that he's fine, but could do more to get Palestinians to return to the negotiating table.
Yeah, I bet.
You know who isn't at the negotiation table?
Is it Palestine?
It's Kevin fucking Rudd. Jules is having a rough time, and we're going to cover that in her episode one day, but in public, she's in trouble for being a lady, and how bloody well dare she.
Absolutely iconic. Everybody's heard the speech, and if you haven't, you have to look it up.
I will not be lectured by that man. I will not be lectured about sexism by this man.
And also look up what bill she passed that day about single parents. Important context to the speech.
On the 1st of January, up to 150,000 single parents are due to be pushed onto the dole.
Within the Labour Party, she's in trouble for carbon tax stuff. I don't care. It doesn't matter. There's Peter Slipper stuff, which we'll get to one day, and the cascading Kevin Rudd leaks. There's also apparently the influence of a Jewish lobby on her decision-making about Israel. Fuck, it's all too much for Albo. He's in tears. He announces that he likes fighting Tories. That's what he does. Come on, man. He's holding a press conference to avow his support for Kevin Rudd in the 2012 leadership spill. Rudd's rinsed 71-31. And then he helps throw Simon Crean under the bus for suggesting a spill in March of 2013 when the vibes weren't right. Albo recounts. I said to people, this is crazy. Kevin doesn't have the numbers. What's the point if you don't have the numbers? At no stage did I think the numbers were there. I guess until they were.
And he's a man who knows numbers. Let's never be in doubt he knows his numbers.
Don't get it twisted, Albo knows his numbers. And most people say Albo was trying to smooth things over behind the scenes. Jules keeps him around because she views him as committed to the interests of the government, like he's some kind of emotional amulet for the ALP. And very few people allege that Albo knew about Kevin's plans and leveraged his relationship with Bob Catter to make the Kevin Rudd return happen because of his personal friendship with Kevin Rudd. But some people allege that. 83 days before the election, and we have another spill. Another Rudd prime ministership, and a new deputy prime minister, Anthony Albanese. He's emotional during his maiden speech, saying, "It says a great thing about our nation that the son of a single parent who grew up in a council house in Sydney could be deputy prime minister." He defeats the disgraced Simon Crean, whose childhood had shinier spoons. As a fun piece of trivia, his father, Frank Crean, was the shortest-serving deputy prime minister in Australia's history. Until Albo. And we're going to learn about how that happened next week when we'll be back with the final part of the Albo saga, the chaos period of the mid-2010s leading to his prime ministership. Now, Karen, we've been with Albo now through his childhood. We've been through his early parliamentary career. There's a lot of things happening. You've got the Rabbitohs, you've got the airport, you've got all of his friendships, and you've got his mum and his dad. What are you feeling about Albo right now?
What am I feeling about Albo right now? Look, I like him less. That's for sure. He's less of a person that I would be like, oh, I'd like to, meet this person, I feel like he's a lot less relatable now, but also in a weird way, he's definitely more like the people that I know who are really into politics, or the people who go into the public service as like a dream career kind of thing. Like, it checks out. It's like, yeah, all well-intentioned. I'm sure you've got lovely morals, and I'm sure you've got a belief system that is very, rewarding to you, and you think that you're in the right, and that's really, really cool, and it must be very comforting to have such absolute confidence. But you're also kind of a bitch, and you also fold so easily, and you'll make concessions on things that, if you were true to your beliefs and sticking to your guns, you wouldn't make those concessions. And I think, I don't know, I just really don't like to see the downfall of someone who was so committed to something and kind of becomes wishy-washy. But he doesn't even do it in a bad way. Like, he's just trying to make friends and, use those friends to his advantage. So I guess, really, maybe what I'm saying is that his beliefs in his youth, for me, were more appealing, but I don't think they were genuine, maybe, if this is the way it's kind of turned out. Maybe he was just really into leftist shit at uni because a bunch of people he liked were really into leftist shit at uni, and he found that was a way to gain power with people. Maybe he just wants to have influence, and yeah, sure, don't we all, Everybody wants to be popular, everybody wants to, be somebody important, but I don't know, to actually go out and do it in that way is always gross to me. And I guess I just hate politicians, I'm talking out of my ass here, but that's I guess what I think.
Yeah, I also hate politicians. It's a poor reflection on someone when they put their face on a poster. I think it means bad things about you. But you start to see his compromises that he makes. You start to see him cozy up a bit more with Labour, right? But at this point, we're only going to be. He's done a few infrastructure related things that have gone quite well. I don't know if I necessarily think that he's in it for Albo. I do have a feeling that he might step down before he gets voted out if he thinks someone else would win it. He knows his numbers, as it were. I don't think that necessarily reflects a good or bad moral thing. It's just he really cares Labour has to be in. That's what his priority is.
I completely agree. You're right. I think I'm probably being a bit uncharitable due to the fact that, I don't know, it's hard to put into words. I think I like him less, but I still see him as someone where I'm like, yeah, I get it, though. You still seem like a human, which perhaps is the most disgusting thing of all, is when you're so close to someone that you could like be like, hey, that's an ordinary regular person, but then they're not. It's a very uncanny valley situation. Whereas with some politicians, like you're just like, oh, I don't know how you live. You fucked if I know how you think.
Yeah, like Barnaby Joyce as an example. If someone was like, I don't fucking know how that exists, what kind of life you live, what kind of things you like to do. But listen, shout out his family. We'll be
Which one?
shout out his comp. We'll be back next week with more Barnaby. Well, I don't think there's more Barnaby Joyce, but more Albo, more Yanni, and more
Kieran.
And maybe more Archie. He's asleep on the couch. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. By the time you'll have been listening to this, it'll be weeks away from now. But we will have learned that Mike Tyson did actually kill Jake Paul in the ring in the 4th round of that fight. So I'm looking forward to seeing what prediction we get correct for the next few weeks. I think Shohei Ohtani's gonna go to space.
Yeah, I think Kamala Harris is going to win the election.
All right, let's see what happens. Bye, everyone.